What do women need to know about business in order to succeed at the game? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Sarah Dusek. And she is a venture capitalist and the co-founder of Enygma Ventures, which is a venture capital fund. And she invests in women-led businesses in Southern Africa. She creates solutions to wealth disparity and provides access to capital for women. And in 2017, after successfully selling her company Under Canvas, which is an amazing concept, and so we'll have her talk a little bit more about that if you haven't heard of Under Canvas. And she sold that company for over $100 million. And then she launched her venture capital firm. And in the same year, Under Canvas was actually added to the Inc. 5,000 list. And she was named to Ernst & Young's EY Entrepreneurial Winning Women list. And today we are going to talk about what Sarah has learned about building a business that is worth over $100 million, and also the keys to raising capital specifically for women, and so much more that we're going to get into today. And so I'm really, really excited for this conversation. And before we go into it further, I do want to do a shout out to Oscar Hamilton and the team over there at that firm. They're amazing, and they introduced us to Sarah. And so thank you to them. We appreciate them. So Sarah, welcome to Leaders Transformation. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. And I know you're coming all the way from South Africa, and we just really appreciate you taking a little bit of time today to share from your perspective and the success that you've created. So let's dive in and talk about your backstory, because I know you started off in kind of the nonprofit space and then kind of forayed into this Under Canvas, which I think is a really cool concept. So tell us a little bit more about where you started in that journey that brought you to today.
Yes, I did not have a traditional path into business, and often many entrepreneurs actually don't, right? We discover that we're entrepreneurial the hard way, and realize actually this is maybe the pathway that we fit in. And as you said, I worked for nonprofit organizations for 7 or 8 years in my early 20s. And I used to think of making money as being like the dark side. You know, I was a save the world crusader, as often aid workers are, with this very real sense that if you make money, that's, it's evil. But actually realized that the vehicle for driving innovation and change really is business, which was a bit of a shock. And it took me a while to sort of get my brain around this idea that for-profit entities could actually do good in the world and actually are the driving force of what moves our world forward, and how we drive change, create solutions to problems. Really, most solutions come in the package of a business, and that's what moves our world forward, which really was the impetus for me then thinking, well, if I think that and if I believe that, maybe I should try and figure out actually running a business myself, starting a business myself.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I do believe that there's a lot of people that get into the world of business, if you will, through kind of the back door of they want to make a difference. I'm not saying all of them do, because there are a lot that get into business because they just strictly want to make money and then realize later on, wow, so what? So I made a lot of money. Now, what are we going to do with that? What does that mean? What kind of legacy am I actually leaving? But this idea of, of getting into a space where you can make a difference, I think is where a lot more people are getting into right now. And you mentioned and touched on this idea of money being bad, and this concept of it's kind of like, got to stay away from that. Tell us a little bit more about that mental shift, and where do you see capitalism? Like you alluded to it a little bit, but where do you see capitalism in terms of making a positive difference? And maybe where it kind of goes over, and you've seen that, I'm sure, in the venture capital world, where it goes over into, it's kind of like it's good up until a point, and then it goes beyond it. And so how do we stay in that position of it being for good and avoiding going into that excess?
Yeah. Well, I think you add another word to the word capitalist, which is conscious. And I definitely consider myself a conscious capitalist, which, you know, capitalism in its own right has a whole heap of problems associated with it, as you alluded to, right? And socialism too, you know, the other end of the spectrum also has a whole lot of problems associated with it. You know, neither is the ideal vehicle in its own right, which is why I like this word conscious, which is that how can we use money consciously to drive our world forward, to do good, to use it to create a better world for everyone. And often we know, you know, business, often people get rich at the expense of someone else, or on the back of someone else. But how do we create wealth? How do we create, because money is making the world go round, whether we like it or not, right? I mean, there is not an economy in the world that doesn't need cash in it. There is trading. We are buying, we are selling, we need it to eat, breathe, live, sleep, use a computer. I mean, everything we do is touching wealth creation in some way or another. So how do we use wealth in a really conscious way? And my own experience of building a business was that as a female founder, it was hard to attract capital. It was hard to move in the right circles where deals were being done, money was, you know, changing hands, and investments were being made. And I started to think about how different would the financial world look if there was more parity, if we were being conscious about where the money was flowing. Because where the money is flowing is dictating what is being built in our world, who is getting to build, what the future for all of us actually looks like. And that's why, for me, parity is really, really important. It's really important that we think about how we're deploying capital in the first place. You know, even with, you know, on every level, what are we funding? How are we funding things? Who are we funding? And for me, the idea, well, first of going into business, which was a radical one in itself, but the step beyond that then became, okay, actually, it matters who controls the world's wealth. It matters who has access to capital, because who controls it and who has access to it is going to affect what we build and the kind of world that we build, which started me on a journey of thinking we've got to fund more women, we've got to fund more people of color, we've got to create diversity, we've got to create more access to capital, period, for diverse groups of people. And that more women need to be at the table making decisions about who has access to capital and who's managing it.
Yeah. You know, it's maybe a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, is, you know, there, and I've heard this before, we've had guests on the show, I mentioned about Daria Shaked, and of course, you know, Eva Yashari and so forth. And they've talked about the difficulty for women to raise capital. Why is it that traditionally men just don't feel like women are good at managing a company? Like there's a perception there, or there's a barrier there. What's the barrier essentially when it comes to the boardroom table?
I know that most of the time that it's conscious.
Okay.
I don't think, at least I'd like to believe that there is not a conscious bias that says women are not as good as men at running in companies or being investable in. But what tends to happen for all of us, we tend to gravitate towards things that we can identify with, or people we can identify with. And when you're investing in someone, you are making a judgment that you trust them, you can relate to them, you're willing to back them, and you're more likely to do that if you're looking at someone who looks like you, or sounds like you, or talks your language, or you have something in common with. You're just more likely to connect and understand the problem that they're solving and identify with the problem. And so the the larger problem is really that most investment decisions are being made by men who are naturally gravitating towards people and products and services that they can understand and identify with. And therefore, it's not necessarily that women are being, I mean, in some cases they may well be, but I don't believe for the most part women are actively being discriminated against and being seen as being subpar, because all the evidence suggests that women build better companies, drive profit faster, are much less likely to go bust. You know, there are a whole realm of statistical evidences about women in leadership and women running companies that generally outperform their male counterparts. So I generally don't believe it's that thinking, because otherwise they would all just be gravitating towards women. I just think it's a natural psychology around who currently has the power and the money and who's making decisions. And men will often argue that there are not enough women to fund, and that just isn't true. It's just that we gravitate towards what we understand and what we like. It's much harder for a man to invest in a product or a service where it's a very female orientated or driven business, because they may not understand it or be able to relate to it. So that's why we need diversity. That's why we need lots of different kinds of people funding lots of different kinds of things, because it will build a better world for everyone and ultimately solve more problems.
Yeah. And that's why people like yourself, pioneers, Daria, Eva, many of these other women who are investing in that is actually giving an opportunity, because in the same way you are investing in women-led businesses because you understand and you're relating to them as well. And so more, so the same thing. So I think that's important, because sometimes women feel like they are excluded, like there's like some kind of ploy and plan and plot against them, and it's not really the case. And we all have a natural bias, that we operate from anyway.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of it is that for a long time this world has been an old boys club, right?
Yeah.
And there's a language that's used, there's terminology, maybe people went to the same schools, and so you were more likely to be able to understand the rules of the game. I mean, it's like if you have grown up around watching baseball matches, and you have learned what the rules of playing baseball are, you are much likely to be able to interact with someone who picks baseball players, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know the rules, you know what's going on, you can connect, you can identify. And I think for a long time, women have been excluded from the game of business, as you were talking about, and don't know the rules. And so the other problem is, whilst they might not be, moving in the same spheres, talking the same language, not being able to identify with male investors means it's much harder for them to even get in the door, because they're not even talking the right language in the first place. And so that, for me, is one of the biggest barriers that women face. It's not that they aren't capable or there aren't enough of them, that they really just don't understand what this takes, because we've not been allowed in the arena and not been moving in the right places, in the right spheres to understand how this all works. Yeah. And certainly that was true for myself as a founder. As I went on my own journey with creating Under Canvas from scratch, I had no clue what it took to raise funding, or I had no idea what a venture capitalist even was, let alone that, I knew that, you went to the bank and got a loan for your business. That was the extent of my financial knowledge around raising capital. So I knew very little, and I have a master's degree. So it's not like I'm an uneducated person. It just, I was not moving in the right circles or spheres and did not have this knowledge. And so, discovering what the metrics were, what people needed to see in a deck, for example, all hugely powerful nuggets of information that allow you to realize, oh, this is how this works. These are because finance is metrics, it's numbers, it's KPIs, it's formulas, does something financially work? Much like when you go to the bank for a loan, the bank will have metrics that they will look at to decide whether you are eligible for a loan or not. venture capitalists work exactly the same way. There are metrics and formulas that they will look at and to determine whether you fit the box or not. And if you don't know what those are, you can't present the right way to get funding. So that's another big piece of the puzzle from my perspective.
Yeah, and you talk about you talk about your own experience, and I know you've also now been teaching others. You've got a website called Prenary, so we'll just do a little plug for that one, pranary.com, and you teach women-led startups what they need to know, some of this information that you're talking about, like pitch decks and what is a pitch deck and how do you communicate and so forth. And so that is really great that you're not only just telling about your own story, you're actually putting it in courses so people can learn about it and so forth. Talk about Under Canvas, even just the concept. I think it's really cool. And for those that haven't heard about it, and I think it's really awesome that even in this pandemic that we have been in the last couple of years, and business has been shut down and people can't travel and all these things, your business is still growing. And that's amazing. So talk about the concept, how you came up, maybe how you even came up with it, and kind of those early stage of like, okay, I've got this great idea and what do I do with this thing? We're going to go from there.
Yes, Under Canvas is a luxury camping company, aka a glamping company. And we really pioneered the whole industry in the US. And we really started with just a very simple idea, which really came from the idea of being on safari in Africa. And as I said, I was an aid worker and spent my early 20s in Africa and fell in love with the bush and fell in love with the idea of doing the outdoors in comfort. And when I met and married my husband, who's a big outdoorsman from Montana, who was used to hunting, camping, fishing, and, roughing it in the outdoors, his and my world collided. And I was like, I also love the bush and the outdoors, but I like nice toilets and clean sheets and hot showers. And so we played around with the idea of, could we recreate a safari experience here in the US? And obviously Montana is a place of big, wide open spaces and beautiful country and lots of wildlife. And so the idea resonated with, could we recreate a little bit of Africa in a Montana kind of way? And so we had this idea of, ecologically, could we do something different with the way hotels were built? Could we think about tourism in a very different way? Could we drive change by showing that it was possible to build a whole hotel and use like hardly any water or hardly any power? Could you build something that was off grid, for example? And so that was the experiment. And so we created these eco camps across the country. And I think today we've got 10 locations around national parks in the US, all of which are incredibly sustainable and eco-friendly. We use about 1/10 of the water in comparison with a similar sized hotel. We leave a minimal footprint on the ground so that if we take our tents away, you may never know that camp was there, that we've protected and preserved incredible space whilst also creating access to it. So that was our problem that we were trying to solve. Can we create access to the outdoors without destroying the outdoors that we love so much? And could we use the inspiration of Africa to start a company? So we started with a tiny idea with no idea how to run a hotel, never been in business before, and thought, well, let's see if we can use our passion for doing something good and creating change and take an idea and run with it. And that was over a decade ago. We started in 2009, and Under Canvas is the largest glamping company in the US of its kind.
Amazing. A simple idea like that. And I think how often we come up with these great ideas and we don't implement them. We're like, oh, that'd be so cool. But taking that idea and actually building on it, and talk about actually even you can go from idea to, like maybe talk about this process of like, okay, I have this idea, this brilliant idea. how do I turn it into a business
Mm.
that is viable?
Yep.
You know, because sometimes people can say, oh, it's just, you know, follow your passion and do what you love. That doesn't always turn into a viable business. There's something that's happening there that you're doing, and you might have done it unconsciously, meaning like you're just naturally just kind of stepped into it. But there was a process that you did that I think would be helpful to unpack
Yeah.
for a moment.
What you're alluding to is the word traction. And venture capitalists always want to see what traction have you got in your business. And what that means is how have you turned your idea into something that is real and active, and you're charging, you know, you're serving your customers and you're actually doing business. And I think the thing that often people think about having a great idea is that it needs to be super original and unique. It doesn't. The idea of tented camps, for example, was not a new idea. We just did it in a new way, in a new place. And we didn't invent the safari experience. We didn't invent glamping, for example. It was already a thing. It's just how do you bring something to market in a new way? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is how do you implement your idea with enough momentum to prove that it works, to prove that people want what you're selling. And often what happens for early stage businesses, and which is super normal and was true for my business too, was you don't hit a home run on the first time you go out to bat. Sorry, we're ending up with lots of baseball analogies tonight, but you know, so how many swings do you have to take, or how do you have to reposition yourself, or what can you learn from all the efforts and the trying that you do? Because what becomes really critical is, you know, in our case, we didn't have any outside funding. We had to beg, borrow, steal, no stealing actually. We used a lot of credit card debt to fund our business initially, because obviously no bank tends to like funding ideas either. But so you tend to have to sort of find some funding from everyone you possibly know and any other sources you can get your hands on, sell what you've, you know, whatever you've got, to start. And once you start is, can you prove that people want what you're selling? And often we discover actually they don't want what we've got, or they want a variation, or they don't want it quite like this, they want it like that instead. And Under Canvas, as it is today, really was our third iteration of a glamping product. It wasn't our first version. And I think that's something really important to think about, is often it takes a whole lot of trial and error to go from idea to actually now I've got some traction. It's not just, oh, I've got an idea, I've got the money, and now I'm making it happen and all is well. It's often a lot of making mistakes or having to reposition, having to adjust until you come up with your own formula that you know people that want it, they're prepared to pay for it, and I've got a little bit of proof, i.e. traction, that we're on the right track and we're going in the right direction.
How did you figure out the pricing?
Trial and error. Yes. I mean, you make your best guesstimate about what you think people will pay, and then you test the market and you see whether people will pay it or not. And obviously the interesting thing is, when we started, we had no idea whether people would be prepared to pay real money to sleep in a tent, because that's what we were really asking them to do. When you can pitch your own tent and sleep in it, right? And now I'm asking you to pay to sleep in a tent that has got some nice sheets and bedding on a real bed. And what will you pay for that? I don't know. So you have to test it out. And, you know, we started with an earlier version of a product that was much lower end, much more basic than where we sort of ended. And we realized, yes, people will pay for that. But they'll also pay for this upgrade and this upgrade and this. And so you eventually sort of really figure out where your product market fit is, and what the best sort of version of profitability / cost to produce that product, you know, where is the magic formula that is, you know, the market wants it, you can make a good margin on it, and there's demand, an increasing demand, and that's all trial and error and testing.
Yeah, because I think sometimes the inclination is to go so low
Mm.
and make it the kind of easy entry for people. And that's
Yeah,
fine, but you may be leaving a lot on the table and people might not see the value in it if it's too cheap, because it's kind of like, well, how good can it
mm,
possibly be? And
exactly.
and so yeah, it's kind of feeling that and not being too high. Or once you get this, you say, oh, well, they're easily paying this. Would they pay
Yep.
this? And would they pay that?
Yep.
And you mentioned about
Absolutely.
upgrades and add-ons and so forth.
Yeah. And we started with, when we started, we had four different, actually, we had three different product types that each sold at a different price point. So you could easily see from that, oh, actually, this one's most in demand, or that one's really in demand, or actually, nobody really wants that one. Or everybody wants everything, but they want that one the most. And that's really helpful too when you're testing a new product.
So
Is can you
testing different prices to different
test
markets.
different price points for slightly different products, and what gets the most traction, what gets the
Mm.
most, where are people telling you they want, and in our early days, we only had a tiny percentage of our tents had bathrooms inside them, because obviously putting a bathroom inside the tent is much more expensive to do and lots more infrastructure. Most of our products still had nice beds and bedside tables and housekeeping, but no bathroom in the tent. You would have to walk to the communal bathroom block to have do your ablutions. And we quickly realized actually most of our customers wanted bathrooms in the tent and were prepared to pay a higher price for having a bathroom in the tent. And I was like, we never would have known that originally until we tested the market and seen what the market really wants. So your customer is your guide, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. I love this. This is great. I think this is helping some startups that are listening, because I think a lot of times I notice from coaching entrepreneurs is that they go with a product, right? And then they're testing that, but it's hard to tell. But what you're talking about is like you had three different
Trying different
ones,
things.
trying
Yeah.
different, testing different ones and seeing, so you have something to compare it to versus an all or nothing. I think that's
Yeah,
really simple and yet very important to do that.
variations on your product. It doesn't even
Yeah.
have to be a different product, because my product was all the same, right? But just had slight variations on it. And we often see this with like software companies or tech development.
Yes.
You see, how do you sell this product? Actually, is the best way to sell it as a subscription model? Is the best way to sell it as a one-time user fee? Or, what is the payment structure for using this? And sometimes it takes 5 or 6 goes to get it right. But if you can test them all, you can get feedback and traction on what works the most and what there's demand for and what people will pay or not pay. And you don't know until you test it.
Yeah. Now, for Under Canvas, did you end up getting venture capital funds later? And at what point
Yeah.
did you get that? And what kind of happened to lead to
Yeah,
that?
we went a long way actually. We started in 2009. We launched our first Under Canvas campus. You and I would know them today at National Parks in 2012. So I had a lot of iteration between 2009 and 2012, all of which lost me money. So we were hanging on for grim life, life and death kind of scenario. And in 2012, we finally felt like this is our business model. This is how we're going to do glamping. This is what this is going to look like. And then we finally, 5 years later, in 2017, we took our first institutional investor on board. And we had 3 locations by that point. We built three camps, and we're trying to build the 4th. And we realized we really needed outside capital if we were going to be able to do more, do it better, do it faster, and really build the team that we needed to build to scale the company.
And what was that conversation like? How did that go? What can we learn from your experience? Somebody's getting to that point.
I have the dark side of venture capital, and I have the light side of venture capital. Which story would you like to hear?
I think both would be helpful.
Yeah. So as I said, I was a complete novice and trying to find a way into the sort of the inner circles of venture. And the sad part for me is that you generally need an introduction to somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. It's not the kind of industry you generally can rock up, send your pitch deck and, make a cold call and expect to get any feedback. So I was making cold calls and getting nowhere until somebody who I met at a conference who was also had been a female entrepreneur, also had been out raising capital, and she was a little bit ahead of me, and she knew a little bit more, and she had more contacts than I did, and she started making introductions to people that she had met. And as soon as she made introductions for me, I started to get meetings, which is excruciating to me because it just shows what a closed world venture capital is in the first place. And why, again, so many women are excluded if you're not already in the club or you don't know someone who knows someone. But when she made introductions, we started to get conversations, and I started to gradually talk to people who would listen, and had to get over the hurdle of we weren't building a tech company. So that was also hard because I wasn't a traditional venture capital play. And I didn't know that. I just was looking for an investor. But started then to learn. A guest also reached out to me and said, "You really should raise money." And I was like, "I'm trying to raise money." And she was very gracious and kind, and also said, "Okay, well, let me tell you the metrics that venture capitalists are looking for." And I was like, that was another light bulb moment of, venture capitalists like to make 10 times their money back. Okay, all right, didn't know that. Didn't know that I wasn't pitching like the bank, and that they want to see kind of what my revenue is going to be like, that they might get a 10 times return. Okay. Putting that in my another piece of nugget I've, stumbled across accidentally. And eventually, after a lot of no's and a lot of tweaking of our deck to try and actually put the right metrics in it that people wanted to see, and understanding my business in a different way to present it to venture capitalists, we got an offer to the table. I mean, that probably took me best part of a year to get to that point. And we finally got an offer, which was for more money than I had gone out to ask for. So it was amazing. And we were constantly, robbing Peter to pay Paul. I was constantly fighting with, am I going to get my payroll paid this month? I mean, it was serious amount of stress and pressure. And we got a term sheet to the table, and it was horrible. It was going to take, for a relatively small amount of capital, which 7 million is to venture capitalists. It's not a huge raise. It was a lot of money to us, more money than we could ever have imagined. But the terms for the money were...
Yeah, how much was it going to cost you? Yeah.
Was going to cost me a lot. I was going to have to give away a third of my business. And it was, more than a third, actually. It was, and give away, so many control pieces of it was like, if I do this deal, I am basically handing control of my business over to someone else. I mean, I'm still going to be driving the business, but basically someone else is going to get to control everything that we get to do or don't do, or how we do it, or what it looks like. And, I am giving up a lot for doing this.
Yeah. And
also, I felt like they were sharks. I felt like I was sitting in, there's a reason they call it Shark Tank, right?
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was sitting in a tank getting eaten alive. And I was like, I don't even want to be in this tank. It's like, I desperately need the money, but I don't want to sit in this pool where I'm constantly getting eaten, and I'm feeling like I'm having to give where I'm not comfortable giving, and I'm having something taken that I don't want to give. And it's like, what do I do? Because I need the money, but yet this is what it's going to look like on the other hand, and this is what's going to cost me. And it was brutal. And, we had to go back to the drawing board and decide, what can we live with? What are we going to do? And ultimately we decided, I cannot get in bed with someone I don't want to sleep with.
Yeah.
I can't do it because
It's
we're
a
going to
tough
get
decision.
married.
Yeah.
We're going to get married and I don't even like you.
Yeah.
And I don't like the way you're doing business and what it's going to cost me to do business with you. And we are just we're not singing off the same hymn sheet. And ultimately, I think that will cause incredible conflict. And I think that will not serve our business very well. So I remember the day I stood in front of my fledgling little company. I think we were like 15, 16 sort of full-time corporate employees at that time, not at camps, but like our head office, and going back and saying, I'm turning the offer down. I'm so sorry, everyone. And being able to stand there and say, we can't do it. You know, we were so excited to get this offer to the table. We can't do it. This is horrible. And I don't know how I had no idea how I'm going to get this done. I don't know what, I've been out here for a year trying to raise money. And when I finally get an offer to the table, I'm going to turn it down. I'm crazy, yes, but I know that I can't do this. And so that 2016, this was 2016, we turned $7 million down. And did not give up a third of our company, more than a third of our company with the check, and battled on to fight another day with borrowing and saving and trying to eke out every last cent that we had to try and pay our bills and pay our staff and not lay anyone off. And it was rough, really rough. And it is the reason today that I am a venture capitalist. It is the reason that I know more women need to sit in the ring and create equitable situations for other women, and need to hold a hand out and say, there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to be in business and make investments and not be a shark and still make great returns and do good at the same time, and build a future that we all want. And I'm very thankful actually for that scenario, because I'm sitting where I am today because of it. But it was brutal. It was horrible.
Well, and I hear so often where people are, you watch Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, and there are times where you look at it and you're like, take the money and go.
Yeah.
And then there are other times it's like, don't do it. And we watch from the sidelines, but to be in it and to be that one to make that decision, and it's tough. And it comes back to this whole idea of understanding the rules of the game and how do you win at the game of business. And early on, you talked about capitalism and conscious capitalism and the difference between that. And so it's like you end up in this place, is what I sense. It's like you end up in this place that it's like, I need to make money my first and foremost in order to do this deal. I'm putting it before the mission. I'm putting it before, my own instincts. And I think that's where people end up selling their soul and finding themselves either, out of the game or in the game, and actually perpetuating the problem.
Yeah,
Because
that's
it's just
exactly
becomes the way it's like, well, this is the way it is. How many times have we heard this is the way it's done? And it's like, well, but what if it didn't have to be done that way? What if you had, like you just said, what if you had metrics? What if you had all these things and you could actually do it in a nice and fair and equitable way? And
absolutely.
It's getting this greed and self-interest out of it to say, how can we all win in this game?
Win.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And that was exactly what it was for me. It was feeling like I was going to have to sell my soul to do this deal. And I felt like I'm selling my soul to the devil here, because the devil is trying to take, is a leech, and is trying to take more than I'm wanting anyone should be asked to give. And it's like, how, and that's what I was told. This is just the way it is. You will not get a deal from anyone else that's better than this, because this is what deals look like for companies like yours doing revenue like this is normal. I was like, I am not liking normal. And and he was right. His terms were very normal. There was nothing particularly unusual about that one firm. I mean, they were not were not any different than most venture capital firms out there in the market. It was just the whole system and the whole structure of it for me just felt unequitable, and it was like a world entering into a whole nother world that was like, this is, I don't fundamentally believe it has to be like this. There's got to be a better way. Again, why I'm sitting on the other side of the table. I'm trying to I'm investing in women, saying there is a better way, and this is what it can look like. And we're partners, and we're in it to win-win together. You win, I win, you win, and we're aligned 100%.
Yeah. It's a whole lot more fun to do it that way. You know, there's an ease and
I think
grace. The
so.
stress that you're the stress that you're talking about, it's like, it doesn't actually have to be that way. And I have a lot of clients who are male. And at the end of the day, they don't really enjoy the game either at some point, because it's so stressful, and heart attacks are so prevalent, and high blood pressure and all this stuff. It's like, why don't we enjoy a little bit of this process, and we can create together something that's really awesome. And that's why on this show, we talk about disrupting for good, which I borrowed from one of my guests who actually wrote a book called Disrupting for Good, Chris Field. And I thought that's exactly what it is. It's for good. It's not just disrupting something. It's not just creating transformation and changing one thing that's not really working very well and making it into something else that's still not working well. It is creating something new and disrupting so that it's better for everyone. And so talk, as we come close to a close here, is to talk a little bit about Enygma Ventures and how you do it differently based on everything that you've learned. Yeah,
and certainly we are not perfect. I certainly have not figured out the magic formula for venture capital, but certainly our desire, as I said earlier, is to be a partner, a real partner at the table that is as invested in the business succeeding and the entrepreneurs succeeding, and being entrepreneur winning focused, because it matters to us how much equity. It mattered to me how much equity I ended up with at the end of the day, right? It matters to me now how much equity our entrepreneurs end up with, and how they go along the journey that they're on, and how they're empowered to do that. Do they have the support that they need to help them succeed? We're not just passively sitting back and putting money at the table and once a quarter coming to a board meeting demanding results. We're actively in the trenches, trying to help each entrepreneur grow as a human being and leader, and B, tell them all the things that I learned on my own journey, so that they can sidestep some of the learnings that I had to go through and learn the hard way and learn the easy way. Mentor, coach, equip, teach, build community. I mean, that's been a super exciting part of what we have been doing, is building a community of female founders who are all at the same stage, all going on the journey because entrepreneurship is super lonely and exhausting. But and most of us don't have any peers that we are interacting with on a regular basis. So building a community of founders who are highly engaged with each other, highly supportive of each other, sharing their best tips, their great finds, finding a great provider who's doing X, Y, and Z, who can also do X, Y, and Z for your business. That's super powerful. And so those is, I think, and as you said, we've got pranary.com, which is our education arm that's got all sorts of learning tools for male and female entrepreneurs focused in on Africa, for helping people grow, helping people learn, not keeping the metrics that matter a secret, for example, helping you understand what the rules are. And for any moment in time, helping our entrepreneurs understand what it looks like to go from here to here, defining what the next level looks like, and creating stage posts for how we're going to make that happen. How together are we going to help you get where you need to go? What is it going to take? Who is it going to take? How are we going to get you there? So I guess to answer your question, we are highly engaged and we're thoughtful about how we invest. how much equity an entrepreneur retains, how much control they retain, how we align ourselves around what success looks like for everyone. And we're just experimenting now with a new kind of investment structure that aligns around what kind of return is expected by when, and what's reasonable and unreasonable, and how we align around how the company is going to grow and what speed. Because some companies are able to grow faster than others, and it doesn't necessarily mean that if your company can't grow like a tech company at the speed of light, that your company isn't worthy of existing or getting funded. It just means it's going to have a different return profile, and therefore what's reasonable. So we don't have a one size fits all when it comes to every investment must make this return profile. We've definitely got metrics around what works for us, and where we're going to be a good fit, but trying to be thoughtful around what can work and what doesn't work, without necessarily throwing all the baby out with the bathwater if it doesn't all look the same and fit in this kind of box, which I actually think is super important for building a world that solves many problems, not just financially viable ones. They all have to be financially viable. That's wrong to say that, but if we only back tech solutions, for example, we're not building a holistic world. So how do we invest in green technology? How do we invest in education? How do we invest in healthcare? How do we invest in all sorts of things that create viable solutions for building a better world for everyone? Yeah. So I don't know if that makes us hugely different, but I like to think so.
Well, I think where one of the distinctions is, and it's subtle, but it's really, really important, is the difference between having people come to you and go, it's kind of like taking that attitude of like, okay, show me what you got. If you got it, we're interested. If not, go back and figure it out, and let us know when you figure it out. How often does that happen? Versus saying, okay, here's how it works. We want you to win. We want you to, to understand what the metrics are. We'll teach you. That's why you have your other website. So you have enygmaventures.com. Entrepreneurial.com is the education arm that you're talking about. You're saying, okay, this is what you need to know. These are the steps you need to go through. And then we can talk and we'll guide you through that process. And so that subtlety of being kind of like across the table, and I've taught sales and so forth for years, and it's this idea that you got to get on the same side of the table in a sales process, and in this, to create a win-win in anything, you've got to come on the same side of the table and say, okay, this is what it would take for you to succeed if you've got an education-based initiative or whatever it is, to have that set of metrics or that set of instructions and nuances to each of those, I think would be very powerful. And even I was just kind of thinking as an idea of having, like, based on the industry, this is what you're looking, you may already have that, but it's like having, this is what each of these is, and laying it out for people so they can actually understand what that rate of return, what that process looks like. So I think it's great, Sarah, and I'm so appreciative that you're doing it and that others are doing it and getting more involved in this so that women do have a seat at the table. They do learn, that we all learn. I have clients of mine that have startups, and certainly I will be sharing this episode with them so they can learn as well. And, there's so many great ideas out there, brilliant, viable, transformative ideas, and to be able to back it up with some money. And not just money, but mentorship and education so that they can have the success, I think is really, really key. So again, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate you and all that you're doing.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for being here and our viewers. Hope you've enjoyed this episode and lots of great information here. Go to enygmaventures.com, Entrepreneurial.com, as well as the education arm for what they're doing. And so we'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. and also all the links and social links, and there's some additional information that we'll make sure is in the show notes for you so that you can get connected and learn more about if you have a startup and you want to learn and you're a women-led startup. And I'm sure, guys, you probably would learn something too, so that you can get to the table, because I know there's a lot of guys out there that are trying to figure out how to get to the table as well. And so I encourage you to check that out. Leaders of Transformation Take Action. So take action on something you learned today. If you have an idea that's been sitting on a shelf and you don't know what to do with it, and you've been, frustrated, or maybe you're knee deep in it and you're kind of at that point where Sarah was talking about, where you're like, we are, surviving on this by the skin of our teeth, then I encourage you to take action today on something that you heard and start, either dust off that idea or be encouraged that there is a solution. Go look for the solutions, because I believe that you can figure it out. If you've got a good idea and you can back it with some effort and the right knowledge and expertise and mentorship and money, then you can make it work. So encourage you to be encouraged. You can do it. I believe that every single person is capable of being a leader of transformation. And so, I think there's brilliant ideas out there, all sorts of different ideas that would change the world. And we just need to help more people to get them to market. So with that, we encourage you to take action, as I said. We also look forward to seeing you next week. We have another episode. Another amazing guest is going to be on the show, sharing their experience in business and creating transformation in the world. So come back next week, and we'll continue this journey of creating leaders of transformation who make the world a better place for everyone. So with that, thanks so much. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.